Chapter 3152. On the other side, Lin Cece was worried about Auntie Lee and returned to the hotel first. Little Red had arranged everything well. Not only did she quit her job, but she also moved her luggage over. When Lin Cece returned, the Annie was sitting properly with Little Red talking to her. There were even 2 sets of snacks in front of her. She was quite touched by Little Red. Back then, Little Red did a great job with Sister Chin Chun. Actually, she didn't have to follow Lin Cece. She knew that Little Red took her along because of Sister Chin Chun. Little Red had indeed taken care of her a lot over the years. If it weren't for Little Red, she wouldn't have had such a good time in the industry. Although background was one thing, she had to have someone reliable by her side. Last time, she almost suffered because Little Red wasn't around. Fortunately, she met Guze later. Fortunately, Lin Cece was stunned for a moment. She felt that she must have gone crazy to use such a word. After a long time, she smiled gently and sat down beside Little Red. Little Red smiled. "Why are you back so early? You just started talking to Auntie." Lin Cece sat down and looked at the Auntie with a blank gaze. However, the Auntie misunderstood. She lowered her head and said softly, "Cece, this is really difficult. Why don't I talk to the manager before going to work?" She wanted to get up, but Lin Cece immediately pressed her hand down and said hoarsely, "Auntie, that's not what I meant. It's my own business." When the Auntie heard this, she was stunned for a moment before her eyes reddened. After some hesitation, she asked, "Did you meet, sir?" It had to be said that only this Auntie knew about Guze and Lin Cece's past. Only she could guess the change in Lin Cece's emotions. When she said this, Lin Cece nodded slowly. "Yes, I saw him. Coincidentally, the production team borrowed the villa that we used to live in. We just happened to bump into each other." She didn't say the details. There was no need to say it, and she didn't have the courage to say it. The Annie saw that she was indifferent, but in reality, she was very sad and felt a little sad. For a moment, there was a long silence. After a long time, Lin Cece smiled and said, "It's okay now. I borrowed Lan Yu's villa. We can start shooting tomorrow. I probably won't see him again in the future." Little Red stared straight at her and muttered, "You're the one who said that. Avoid him in City H from now on." She didn't know what was wrong with her. She said, "Cece, maybe you should retire from the entertainment circle after you earn enough money and go to City A to accompany your parents. Or you should find a man to marry. Find an old man who loves you and try your best to live a better life. Make everyone jealous." As Little Red spoke, its eyes lit up. She had been with Lin Cece for a long time. She had seen her crying and angry, but she had never seen her so despondent. The Annie could see it too, but she didn't dare to say it. Lin Cece squeezed out a smile. "Really, I'm fine. It's all in the past." She stretched and said, "I'm a little uncomfortable in there, but it's where I used to live." She said again in a low voice, "Actually, it's not a loss. There's a tomb for me there. After all, I have a mansion for nothing, although I can't live there." She said it with a smile, but looked worse than crying. Chapter 3153. She looked at Cece and said slowly, "You said there's a grave there?" Lin Cece grunted, "It's mine, but also not mine." She sighed softly. "It's my past, right?" The Auntie was silent for a moment before she whispered, "Do you want to know what's buried there?" Lin Cece looked at the Auntie and didn't say anything. The Auntie seemed to be lost in her memories. After a long silence, she said softly, "It's a sweater. Cece, you knitted it yourself?" That night, Sir buried it himself and sat in the backyard for the whole night. He asked me to stay there and take care of it. He said you would come back, but I didn't see you. Cece, Sir loved you back then." Lin Cece's heart was touched, and her nose turned red. Her jade-like eyes froze, and she was stunned for a long time before she squeezed out a smile. "He didn't love me. He loved the little fool from before." She paused and then said, "The little fool is gone, so he won't stay there anymore, and no one will go back." Although the Annie was worried about her daughter, Cece had something else on her mind. She sighed again, a little melancholic. Lin Cece didn't want her to worry about her, so she cheered up. "Auntie, Little Red and I will take you out tonight. As for the lawyer, I've already asked someone to keep an eye out for me. We have to find the most suitable lawyer for this lawsuit. She whispered again, "No matter what, I have to finish the commercial in 2 days." The Annie could understand. She had taken care of her in the past and knew that she had the best personality. Although she was normal now, in the Annie's heart, Cece was still that weak and small child who needed protection. Seeing her like this now, she felt both gratified and heartbroken. In short, all sorts of feelings welled up in her heart. Little Red was a little touched. In the past, Cece might not have agreed to shoot the commercial. The pay was only $4 or $5 million, and the penalty wasn't much. It wasn't that Cece couldn't afford it, and King Entertainment couldn't afford to offend people. But it was clear that Cece had insisted on finishing the commercial after crying. She was really doing it for the Annie. She also remembered Cece saying that Gouze liked the little fool from before, and in her heart, she was very dissatisfied with Gouze. Perhaps the current Cece was burdened with many things and was no longer able to entertain President Gou like the little fool in the past. However, the current Cece was so good. Even if he didn't like her, someone else would. Just as she was thinking about this, Lynn Cece's phone rang. She saw that it was an unfamiliar number. After thinking for a moment, she picked it up. "I'm Lynn Cece." "Cece." The voice on the other side was strangely familiar. "It's me." Lynn Cece still hadn't come back to her senses. She asked with some embarrassment, "May I ask who you are?" "Oh, well, bye." The voice on the other side had a hint of laughter in it. "How could you forget it so quickly?" She felt a little uncomfortable. He had helped her a lot today, but she had forgotten about him as soon as she turned around. She apologized. "I'm sorry." After a pause, he asked, "What's the matter?" "Wan Zhao. Old Chung said he's going to eat skewers. Are you coming out?" Yi Mubai said very naturally. Lin Cece thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "I have a friend here." Chapter 3154. Lin Cece wondered why he mentioned his brother's name, but then she suddenly remembered that Yi Mulin, wasn't he the most famous lawyer in B City? She wanted to refuse, but she changed her mind after looking at Aunt Lee. She said in a low voice, "Okay, see you later." Yi Mubai was naturally very polite. "Don't drive. I'll take you there." Lin Cece also agreed. It was someone's good intention, and she couldn't refuse. She put down the phone and smiled. "I found a lawyer by accident, Yi Mubai's brother. What a coincidence." Little Red was stunned for a moment. "He's the best lawyer in B City. I heard that he can win cases in seconds." Lin Cece was afraid that Aunt Lee would think too much, so she comforted her. "Acquaintances will give you a discount." Although she said that, Aunt Lee knew clearly in her heart. She felt that she had dragged Cece down and was a little regretful. In the end, it was Little Red who persuaded her. "You used to take care of her, so it's natural for her to do something for you now. If she doesn't care about you, she'll feel uneasy. Let's go. Aunt Lee, relax and have a meal. You'll go back in 2 days. You'll definitely be able to solve your daughter's case and make a name for yourself in America." Aunt Lee smiled helplessly. "If she can get out, why would I let her stay in America? Now I know that no matter how good the outside world is, it's better at home. If something happens outside, there's no one to talk to, and it's hard to do anything." Little Red nodded. "That's true, but now we have Cece and many people to help. We can definitely save your daughter." Aunt Lee relaxed and followed them to the parking lot in front of the hotel. Originally, Lin Cece and the others thought that they would take the cruise car, but unexpectedly, Yi Mubai drove a black Maybach. When they came out, he was sitting in the front, smoking, and the window was open, revealing a gentle and good-looking face. Little Red pulled Lin Cece and coughed lightly. "I think she's interested in you. You're dressed up so exquisitely at night, and you're driving such a flashy car. I don't believe that there's nothing going on." Lin Cece looked at her. "Don't talk nonsense. How is that possible? He's a movie king." "A movie king is not an emperor. He's not a man, so he doesn't need a woman? Can a fan become his wife?" Xiao Hong rolled her eyes. "Think about it. Why is he still so passionate about Annie Lee's matter? You've only known him for a day." The more Little Red spoke, the more she felt that it was highly possible. Then, she looked at Lin Cece cautiously. "You can do whatever you want with this person, but don't play around. Otherwise, his fans will tear you apart." As he said that, He gestured. More than 80 million fans. It's no joke. Just a mouthful of saliva from each of them could drown you. Lin Cece was a little lazy. There's so many people here, and they can't even stand and be city. How can they all vomit on me? You're naughty. Although Xiao Hong was an assistant, she was very fierce. I've warned you before, don't provoke this kind of old man who has never been in love before. This kind of old man is always sultry on the outside. When the time comes, I won't even be able to get rid of him. Lin Cece whispered, I'll just deal with it for a while. Once Annie's case is over, we won't see each other anymore. What do you think? Chapter 31:55. Lin Cece slapped her on the back and said, You're the one drooling when you look at him and want to sleep, aren't you? Little Red chuckled and said, You saw through me. In fact, I'm also one of his more than 80 million fans. 60% of the fans want to sleep with him. The rest are either underage or have menopause. Lin Cece was amused by her words and didn't want to argue with her. She just gave her a warning look. The three of them went over together. Yi Mubai even got out of the car and opened the door for the three ladies. The aunties were very restrained, but Yi Mubai was obviously very good at dealing with old aunties. He behaved well and didn't put on any airs, which made the aunties feel relieved in an instant. Little Red glanced at Lin Cece thoughtfully and then sat in the back seat. She said, It's too crowded with three people sitting in the back. Cece, you sit in the front. In front of Yi Mubai, Lin Cece couldn't argue with her, so she walked to the front and wanted to open the door. Yi Mubai had already opened the door for her with one hand on the roof to prevent her from hitting her head. This consideration was very gentlemanly. Lin Cece smiled at him and got into the car. Yi Mubai also went around and buckled his seatbelt. He took the initiative and said, Old Chung is already over there. He heard that you guys are coming, so he asked the whole crew to go. Lin Cece knew that he made this arrangement because he didn't want the aunties to feel uncomfortable, so he simply called a group activity. She was a little touched. To be honest, it was rare for someone of Yi Mubai's status to do this and pick them up personally. She wasn't a fool. Yi Mubai was shooting an advertisement alone and drove a luxury car with a number ending with 88. It was impossible to say that he didn't have a family background. Moreover, he was so familiar with Guzet. Lin Cece thought of this name and was in a daze again. She lowered her eyes and didn't say much. Old Ba was focused on driving. He only took out a cigarette and lit it when he reached the red light. He asked casually, Why didn't you say anything along the way? Although he asked it normally, his tone revealed the intimacy of an acquaintance. It was very much like the relationship between a boyfriend and a girlfriend. Little Red was secretly calculating in the back seat, while the auntie was already frightened and whispered, Is this Cece's boyfriend? Little Red playfully leaned over and spoke in a voice that only she, the auntie, and Yi Mubai could hear. He's chasing after Cece. The auntie said, That's quite attentive. This kind of kindness was different from how Mr. Gu had treated Cece back then. This kind of kindness was the kind of kindness that Cece had agreed to. It was a kind of kindness that made one's body and mind happy. Mr. Gu had actually treated Cece very well back then. It was just that Cece had waited for a longer time. Often she would sit at home alone and repeat a simple task hundreds of times because it would pass the time. Every time Mr. Gu came to the villa, Cece would be happy for a few days, but after that, she would have to wait for another 10 days or even a month. The auntie thought of this and also felt that Cece was doing quite well now. At least she didn't have to wait for anyone anymore. At least she wouldn't run downstairs barefooted when she heard the slightest movement at night and say excitedly, Is it Guzet? When she heard that it wasn't him, there would be disappointment in her eyes. She would then slowly walk upstairs, and after taking 2 steps, she would turn around and ask pitifully, Is it really not him? I clearly heard the sound of his car. The auntie thought that now no one would go to that villa in the middle of the night, and there wouldn't be a little fool waiting for Mr. Gu there anymore. She couldn't say who was more pitiful. Chapter 31:56. Lin Cece didn't hear what Little Red said, but Yi Mubai did. He smiled and suddenly said, What do you think? Lin Cece thought he was asking her and was a little confused. What? Yi Mubai had a charming smile on his face and said gently, "I'm asking your cute assistant." Little Red said with a fake smile, "I don't think so." "Really?" Yimu Bai was still smiling and looked very elegant. "But I want to give it a try." "Are you serious?" Little Red frowned. Yimu Bai smoked another cigarette. "Yes, I'm serious." Although he was very elegant, he was actually a heavy smoker. Everyone knew that, but he didn't hate it when he opened the car window. After driving for about 10 minutes, they arrived at a very famous barbecue restaurant in Sea City. It was said that the meat was imported from abroad and tasted great. Lin Cece and Little Red had just gotten out of the car when they heard Director Chung say to the crew in the hall, "Old Bai is treating today. Eat as much as you want. Don't save money for him." After saying that, he looked at them and smiled. He walked over and glanced at the Andy's face. "You must be CC Sandy. My surname is Chung. Let's have some fun with us uncouth people today." The Annie was also a decent person. She nodded and said some polite words. She knew that the man who drove, well, didn't say anything about her. She also knew that it was better not to mention it tonight. They were having a good meal together, and it wasn't appropriate for her to mention it. As she was thinking, Yimu Bai put his hand on the auntie's shoulder and patted her gently. He whispered, "I'll take you to my brother's law firm when we get back to Be City in a few days." The auntie was very touched, but she couldn't show it too much in such an occasion, so she nodded slightly. Then, it was time for everyone to have a kiss. Director Chung was very good at creating the atmosphere, and he knew what Old Bai was thinking, so he led the topic to Old Bai. Yimu Bai just smiled with a cigarette in his hand, looking very good-tempered. Director Chung wanted to laugh. Lao Bai came from a family like that, so how could he have such a good temper? However, his self-control was top-notch. To put it bluntly, he lived with a mask, but no one knew whether it was true or not. As Yimu Bai watched Old Chung speak, he didn't forget to take care of a few women, but at the same time, he didn't make them feel restrained, especially when he took good care of Annie Lee. Even Little Red was full of praise in her heart. She sighed in her heart. Such a man can't be found anywhere, and he's really good to Cece. Little Red had been in the circle for so long. She wouldn't be so naive to think that a man like Yimu Bai would be so kind to Annie Lee, who he had only met once, and even wanted to help her. He was so busy and didn't have so much time. Yimu Bai's strength lay in the fact that he clearly knew what he was thinking and his purpose, but he did it extremely well, making people feel comfortable and unable to dislike him. It was probably because of Yimu Bai's good nature. As Little Red thought about this, she took another look at Cece. In the current situation, she had an idea. If Yimu Bai was very serious, she might be able to accept it. However, when she looked at Lin Cece, she saw that she was looking in one direction with a somewhat worried expression. Little Red looked over, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Guze. Guze who was drowning his sorrows in alcohol. Chapter 31:57. Lin Cece looked at Guze. She watched him pour a glass of beer and drink it, then pour another glass. He wasn't drinking. He was simply pouring it down. Moreover, Guze was drinking alone, so he didn't notice that there were acquaintances here. The auntie also saw him and exclaimed, "Isn't that Mr. Gu?" Guze looked over and met Lin Cece's eyes. At this moment, Yimu Bai placed a skewer of meat in front of Lin Cece and said thoughtfully, "This skewer is not bad." Lin Cece came back to her senses and looked at him in a hurry. "Did you see it?" "Yes, I saw it." Yimu Bai looked at her. "Do you want to eat this skewer now?" Lin Cece looked down and didn't say anything. She just picked up the food that he brought for her and ate it in small bites. Although it was a very common behavior among friends, it was common for an ex-wife to accept another man's kindness in front of her ex-husband. Everyone understood what it meant. Guze also understood it. Moreover, Lao Bai had expressed his feelings in front of him today. If he didn't plan to remarry, then Lao Bai would go after Lin Cece. Sure enough, he acted quickly. Guze looked at her. He wanted to look away, but his gaze still landed on Lin Cece's body and even her lips. She ate very quietly and didn't act too close to Lao Bai. But even so, he felt that they were already very close. Guze laughed at himself. What did he care about? She wasn't that person. Lao Bai was going after someone else. If it was the same person, then it was just a shell that she had once used. Guze didn't look anymore and continued to drink his beer. However, Yimubai walked over and said a few words to him. They were originally acquaintances and didn't interfere with each other's business, but somehow they started fighting. Guze made the first move. Yimubai was punched and took a few steps back. He wiped the blood from his lips in the night wind and sneered. Not feeling well? If you're not feeling well, then come and hit me. I'll be right here. If you hit me until I can't get up and break all my bones, then I won't bother her anymore. Guze stood in the fierce night wind, his thin clothes blowing in the wind, looking cold. His chest heaved as he sneered. Old Bai, do you know what you're saying? Yimubai still looked calm, one hand in his pocket. Guze, you're fucking sick in the heart. If you put her down, don't drink like this. Also, do you think that she and your wife are not the same person? Yimubai smiled coldly. Just because she's not stupid, just because she's normal, you feel that she's not the same person. Actually, you're afraid that she won't love you anymore. You said it's not the same person. So let me ask you, was this the body you were hugging before? In the end, his voice was almost a roar. This was also something that Lao Bai didn't want to admit, but he had to wake up Guze. Even if it would give him one more opponent, he didn't want this guy to suddenly change his mind after he finally got Cece. It was better to wake him up now. Lin Cece listened to Yimubai's words, and her face turned pale. She gently walked to his side, pulled his sleeve, and whispered, "Don't say any more. Just leave me some face, okay?" Chapter 31:58. Yimubai retracted his gaze and looked at her little face. His Adam's apple moved slightly, and he smiled bitterly. "I'm sorry. I was impulsive." Lin Cece just smiled. "I know you didn't do it on purpose." She had never thought that Yimubai would know so much about her and Guze's past, but after thinking about it, she understood that he must have asked about Qinshun. Qinshun and Lao Bai were quite close. Yimubai's gaze was fixed on her little face, and he said slowly, "I asked him just now, and he didn't answer. Does it mean that he gave up? Does it mean that I can pursue you?" Although Lin Cece had been moved, she had never thought that he would say such a thing in front of Guze. And she had never thought that she would be with a man like Yimubai. It wasn't that he wasn't good, but that he was too good. He didn't have any scandals, and he liked small animals. He was a mysterious and warm man, while she was full of holes. She whispered the word, "No," but before she could make a sound, Lao Bai kissed her lips. His lips had a faint smell of tobacco, and there was a unique smell of men, which affected her nerves again and again. She felt a little numb, a little drunk, and at a loss. She didn't know whether it was because of Yimubai or because of Guze, who was a few steps away. She only felt Lao Bai holding her waist and slowly pulling her into his arms. Their bodies were pressed against each other, and it couldn't be more intimate. But in the eyes of another man, it was like a bone-piercing cold wind. Guze had been standing, watching her in someone else's arms, watching her being kissed by someone else. He clenched his fingers, loosened them, and clenched them again. Finally, he took 2 steps back, sneered, and left without looking back, disappearing into the night. Yimubai let go of Lin Cece, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Sorry." Lin Cece was a little embarrassed. She took 2 steps back, and her eyes fell on Guze's back. "You still love him?" Lao Bai said lightly. He then took out a cigarette and looked at her as he smoked. His gaze was gentle, not as aggressive as it was a moment ago. Lin Cece wiped her lower lip. "Why did you kiss me?" Final confirmation. Yimubai smiled. "If you don't mind, I apologize." Lin Cece didn't say anything more. She just sat back down. Her gaze fell on a place where Guze had been sitting. After a while, she walked over and sat down like him. In front of him, there were many skewers, all of which the little fool liked to eat. There was even a roasted pigeon. Lin Cece looked at him and smiled slightly, but it was a bitter smile. Yimubai stood behind her and heard her say in a low voice, "Yimubai, he only likes the person who lost her memory. I'm not her." After saying that, she left her seat and returned to her original seat. That night, Lin Cece drank a lot of alcohol and was almost drunk. Later on, she cried and leaned on the table, saying one sentence, "I'm not her." Xiao Hong's eyes turned red, and the auntie's heart was about to break. Yi Bai stayed by her side the whole time, listening to her speak and watching her cry. Perhaps it was because she had been repressed for too long, or perhaps it was because Guze didn't want her once again today. Guze just watched him kiss Lin Cece without doing anything. Chapter 31:59. But people were often like that. The more they cared about someone, the more likely they would fall into a trap, or they would put themselves in a comfortable area and not want to get out, because that was safe. In the end, Yi Bai carried Lin Cece into the car. The auntie in the back seat had been taking care of Cece and would occasionally carry her. Hugging her like this, it was as though she had returned to the past. Cece would always lay on her knees, her sharp little chin resting on her thighs. She would ask happily, "Auntie, Guze said he would be back today. What time will he be back?" The little fool kept asking tirelessly when Mr. Gu's car didn't come back. At that time, although she was silly, that feeling was really wonderful. There was only one little fool in the world who only cared about someone wholeheartedly. No wonder Mr. Gu couldn't forget her. The auntie sighed sadly. Yi Bai looked at Cece from time to time. He knew that he was selfish tonight. Guze and Lin Cece were not completely unrelated. They still hated each other. The hatred meant that they hadn't forgotten the love. And tonight, he forced Guze to let go, or rather, to give up the flesh and blood Lin Cece. He kissed Lin Cece in front of Guze and bet Guze's pride that he would let go. Everything went as he wished, but he saw Lin Cece's pain. Yi Bai smiled lightly. Did they really hate each other? They loved each other, but they just didn't know what reason they had to find to be together. He didn't leave until he sent Lin Cece to the hotel suite. When he went out, he smoked a cigarette, thinking that he might not be the only one who couldn't sleep tonight. In the suite, Lin Cece vomited several times because of the discomfort. Her stomach was terrible, but her mind was getting clearer. She leaned over the basin, washed her face with water, and slowly slid down. The auntie was taking care of her. She looked at the auntie and gently held her hand. "I'm fine. Auntie, you go to sleep first." How could Annie Lee be at ease? She stayed with her until 1 or 2 o'clock at night before going to sleep. There were 2 rooms in the suite, and Lin Cece slept in one room alone. She didn't fall asleep until late at night. Her head hurt, but she was very awake. Her mind was full of the roast pigeon. She sat up and looked out the window. Suddenly, she felt a little impulsive. Half an hour later, a taxi stopped in front of Villa. She jumped out of the car and ran to the guard and knocked on the door. When the guard saw that it was her, his expression became complicated. Lin Cece asked anxiously, "Is Guze here?" The guard's expression was even more complicated. After a long time, he said softly, "Mr. Gu had a car accident." "Car?" Lin Cece's face was pale. "Lin Cece, I don't know, but he's in this hospital." The guard hesitated for a moment before giving her the address. Lin Cece took a look and immediately jumped into the taxi. "Go here." Lin, she looked at him. Lin, Lin. Lin. Lin Cece looked up. Her gaze was clear in the rearview mirror. After a long time, she whispered, "It's my ex-husband." The driver felt a little uncomfortable and said, "You guys must be preparing to remarry." "No, we hate each other." Lin Cece looked down. "We promised to never see each other again." The driver didn't dare to make another sound. Chapter 31:60. When Lin Cece arrived at the hospital, it was already late at night. Even a place like the hospital was quiet. Only a few nurses on duty were walking back and forth in the hallway. She felt shy when she was close to home. Lin Cece had never thought that she would be so hesitant when she was close to someone. She asked the receptionist if there was an emergency patient named Guze. The receptionist saw her anxious face and quickly checked for her. Then the nurse breathed a sigh of relief. "There is such a patient, but it's not serious. He just scratched his arm. He could be discharged tomorrow morning after one night." "Which ward is he in?" Lin Cece's fingers clung on the desk, and she bit her lower lip. The nurse smiled and told her the room number. "It's a VIP ward." After saying that, Lin Cece had already run to the elevator. The red words on the elevator lit up one by one. Lin Cece was inexplicably nervous. Would he be surprised to see her? Or would he say something unpleasant to her? But even if he said something unpleasant, she wanted to see him. Immediately. Therefore, the short 1 minute became extremely difficult. Lin Cece kept waiting for the number to pass. She kept waiting. When the red number jumped to the 8th floor, she immediately got out of the elevator and walked towards the ward. The door of the ward was ajar. Her fingers fell on it hesitantly, but she only hesitated for a few seconds before she immediately knocked on the door of the ward. Perhaps she was afraid of being rejected. She pushed the door open without waiting for the sound from inside. The spacious ward was quiet. Only a nurse was helping Guze bandage the wound on his hand. Her movements were very gentle, for fear of hurting the distinguished patient. But the sound of Lin Cece opening the door startled the nurse. The nurse's hand trembled and directly hurt Guze. Guze let out a muffled groan. The nurse hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gu." Guze said that it was fine, and then his eyes fell on Lin Cece, who was at the door. Lin Cece's chest was slightly panting. She stared straight at him with a hint of eagerness in her eyes. However, his eyes were cold, which was the opposite of hers. She was frozen, but she still tightened her grip and said softly, "I want to talk to you." Guze was stunned. He looked at the nurse and ordered, "You can leave first." The nurse was stunned. "But Mr. Gu, your wound needs to be bandaged. I'll call you back later." Guze's tone became even more indifferent. The nurse did not dare to stay any longer. When she went out, she glanced at Lin Cece. Lin Cece moved aside and let the nurse leave. She still stood at the door and looked at him. Guze raised his hand to look at the wound. "Don't you have something to say?" Her chest rose and fell even faster. Her face was pale and almost transparent under the light, and her eyes were dark and bright. She took a step forward and muttered, "I saw you ordering the roasted pigeon. I also saw the tombstone in the backyard." Guze get to the point. His tone was very calm. His dark eyes stared at her little face, as though he could see through her heart. Lin Cece was frozen by his coldness. She could not say a single word of what she wanted to say. She wanted to turn around and leave, but she was unwilling to do so. Today's discovery drove her to work hard. "Guze, I want to ask, do you still want me?" With that, her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She twisted her fingers and hid her unease. Chapter 31:61. Guze was still calm. His eyes fell on her fingers, and, of course, he saw that she was missing a little finger. Then, he slowly moved his eyes to her little face and smiled faintly. "Miss Lin, you might have misunderstood." Lin Cece's face was as pale as snow. Guze smiled slightly, but that smile was like a blunt knife that could kill. "Everything that happened to me has nothing to do with you, let alone saying that I don't want you to be so intimate with me. If I have to take responsibility for what happened that night, then the man who should be responsible for Miss Lin will probably have to queue up. Moreover, I also have a fiancé." As he spoke, he stared at the hurt in her eyes, and his voice became softer. "Warmth is here. I don't want her to misunderstand." Lin Cece stood there, suffering the greatest humiliation in her life. She didn't know why she was still standing there. She only knew that she couldn't move an inch. She also knew that if she left now, she and Guze might never have a chance again. So she held back her anger and took a step forward. She said very softly, "I know you're angry, but can you let me finish? There's no need to say anything." The scene of her kissing Yi Mubai appeared in front of Guze's eyes. "We've never met before, let alone in the future." Lin Cece pursed her lips. "There's nothing between me and him. It doesn't matter whether there's anything or not. What's important is that I, Guze, don't like someone with a status like Miss Lin. I didn't like her in the past, and I won't like her in the future. Leave. Don't come back in the future, and I won't see you." Guze's tone was very cold. Lin Cece stood there without moving. The blood in her body was almost frozen, as she couldn't move at all. And Guze didn't look at her anymore. He just slowly leaned against the head of the bed and casually flipped through a medical magazine. Lin Cece's very soft voice came into his ears. "Are you sure? Are you sure you want me to go? Are you sure I'll be with someone else in the future?" Guze snorted coldly, which was a tacit agreement. There was another gasp, as if she was crying. He finally looked up at her. Lin Cece's eyes were a little red. She held the armrest and stared at him. So you don't want me anymore, do you? She stubbornly wanted an answer. Guzé gave her an answer. Yes. Then, she heard the sound of her heart breaking. She looked down, but there was nothing, only tears falling one by one. I know. Her voice was slightly choked. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Gu. She called him Mr. Gu and looked at him one last time. I'll never look for you again. After she said that, she took a step back in a daze and accidentally retreated to the door. With a bang, he hit the back of his head. It was very painful, but it was far from the feeling of heartache. She had tasted this feeling a few years ago, and today she was overestimating herself and tasted it again. Lin Cece's eyes were misty. After staring blankly for a long time, she said in a low voice, I should go. She was a little out of her wits. She turned around to open the door and was about to leave when she heard his voice from behind. Send her off? She was startled and turned around in shock, only to see that there was already someone standing beside Guzé's bed. It was Warm, his fiancée. Chapter 3162. Lin Cece was in a daze again. After a long time, she shook her head. No, I'll get someone to pick me up. Guzé then sneered. I'm overthinking. Miss Lin will indeed be picked up by someone. He said calmly, it's Lao Bai. You should know your place when you're with him. Do you think he's just an ordinary obvious? His brother is Yi Mulin. Do you know who his father is? Who else has the surname Yi? You can ask your father if you don't know. Don't be fooled by others without knowing what's going on. President Gu, you're overthinking. We have nothing to do with each other. It has nothing to do with Guzé, who's sincere to me and who's fooling me. She stepped back again and leaned her back against the door. She smiled absent-mindedly. Yes, it has nothing to do with me. She lowered her eyes and whispered in a voice that only she could hear, I've used all my strength to love you, but you still don't want it. She didn't cry because she felt that it wasn't worth it. Many years ago, she was abandoned by a man. She chose to take revenge on him and hurt herself. Many years later, she was abandoned by the same man again. This time, she chose to take a step back. That was fine. In fact, she had a lot of burdens on her shoulders. She couldn't make a mess of herself for a man. It wasn't just her who would be ruined, but her parents who were closest to her would be ruined. She actually didn't have the right to be sad. Even if she wanted to cry, she had to hide it and be careful in the middle of the night. She finally looked up at him and looked into his soul-stirring eyes. She said in a low voice, Mr. Gu, future Mrs. Gu, I wish you happiness. She turned, opened the door, and left. This time, she left forever, because she was ready to let go. There was no one who couldn't let go. No matter how painful it was, she had to let go because it would hurt more if she didn't let go. She didn't want to hurt anymore. Loving someone was too painful. She didn't want to spend those heart-wrenching nights alone anymore. She let go of her hatred and her love for him. It was like a small mound buried in the backyard of the villa, buried until forgotten. The door closed softly. When XIN looked at Guzé's face and said softly, I'll call the nurse to bandage you. Scram. Guzé's voice was very soft. Don't make me say it again, or your father's days in prison will be even more difficult. When XIN still wanted to say something, but Guzé raised his voice again. Get lost, do you hear me? Wenwan pursed her lips and gritted her teeth. Okay, I'll go. However, as soon as she stepped out, she heard banging sounds coming from inside. Guzé smashed everything that could be smashed in the ward, and the result was that his slightly fractured hand became fractured. The lights in the hospital's operating theater lit up again. This was because a certain stubborn patient was too uncooperative. If he did not perform the surgery well, his hand would be crippled. But no matter how angry he was, the girl who came to ask him, Guzé, do you still want me? Had already walked out. She walked alone on the street, looking at the darkened neon lights. For the first time, she burst into tears like a lost child. She lay there, ignoring the gazes thrown at her by the passers-by, ignoring the tugs and tugs at her. She cried like a child, because love was gone. There was a gentle drizzle in the night sky of Sea City. In such an autumn season, It hit her body and was wet, but she didn't care at all. In the sky, there was an umbrella. The umbrella was very big, and the fingers holding the handle were very beautiful. Chapter 31:63. She looked up from his embrace, trying to see him clearly. However, he held the umbrella with one hand and pressed her head with the other. His voice was deep and slow. "Don't look. Just think of me as him." This is the last time. Lin Cece, who was lying on his shoulder, suddenly bit down hard on his shoulder. She bit down hard. She soon tasted the taste of blood. She loosened her teeth and was stunned. But that person's fingers gently caressed her hair, and his voice was low and gentle to the extreme. "If you want to cry, then cry." That night, he brought her to a suite. She cried so hard that she couldn't see clearly. He changed her wet clothes into a bathrobe. She lay on the bed and cried silently. The man sat on the floor and leaned his head against hers. He sang very well and told her a lot of jokes. He even said that it was rare for an old man like him to fall in love. The night, rain slowly stopped. The night sky outside was dark blue with a few bright stars. Lin Cece tilted her head and looked at him quietly. "Oh, bye, it's going to be dawn." The man's fingers gently brushed the hair on her forehead, and he whispered, "Call me Mu-Bai or Yi Mu-Bai. Anyone can call me Old Bai, but you're not allowed to." She turned her head to look at him again. He was really handsome under the dim light, but he hadn't slept the whole night. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked a little tired. Lin Cece looked at him and pursed her lips. Her voice was hoarse. "Why?" His gaze fell on her little face, and there was a hidden flame in his eyes. "Don't you know?" She shook her head, but her eyes were still on his face. Yi Mu-Bai lifted his body and kissed her lips gently. It only lasted for 2 seconds. "The first time I kissed you didn't count when I was filming a commercial." He smiled. "Do you hate it when I kiss you?" Her gaze fell on his face, and she shook her head for a while before looking down. "It's not right for you to do this." Her eyelashes couldn't stop trembling, and her petal-like lips were tightly pursed. She seemed to hesitate for a long time before slowly opening her eyes and looking at him. "Yi Mu-Bai, I was raped when I was in New York, and I accidentally lost my child. I can't have children anymore. My little finger is gone." She raised her hand and bared it in front of him. She smiled gently, but there was a trace of tears in her eyes. "Look, Yi Mu-Bai, my past is so terrible. I'm really not a good partner for you to fall in love with. Even if I'm a little uglier, even if I'm a little older, I'm still 100 times better than someone like me." She pulled his hand and placed it on her heart without hesitation. Her eyes were as sorrowful as a dying little beast. "Someone was let go here, and now it's broken. You're so good, and it's not worthy of you." Tonight, Yi Mu-Bai had always let her do whatever she wanted. Even if she said she didn't want to accept it, he wouldn't force her. This was the affection of an old man. It silently seeped in her life like a gentle breeze and drizzle. It was impossible to guard against it. "I'll try my best to fall in love again." He smiled gently, but didn't pull his hand back. Just like that, he placed it on her heart. Lin Cece was so tired that she actually fell asleep hugging his arm. After a long time, Yi Mu-Bai gently climbed onto the bed and lay beside her. He knew that if he forced himself on her when she was at her weakest, it might help her get over it and forget about Guze faster. Chapter 31:64. When Lin Cece woke up, it was already 9:30. There was no one beside her. Yi Mu-Bai had already gotten up. Although he wasn't lying on the bed, Lin Cece didn't feel nothing at all. The pillow beside her was slightly sunken, and the blanket beside her was also warm. That was the body temperature of a man. She bit her lower lip, knowing that he slept on the same bed as her last night. As for whether he did anything, Lin Cece didn't think about it. If a man like Yi Mu-Bai was suspicious, then there were no gentlemen in this world. She was a little absent-minded. She thought about what he said last night, saying that it was rare for him to fall in love after so many years. She believed it, but she didn't dare to accept it. In the beginning, Guze also said that he liked her. After saying so much, she was willing to go to Sea City, to a place where she didn't know anyone and had to wait every day. She felt that it was better to live alone in this life. Just as she was thinking, Yi Mubai came out of the kitchen, feeling refreshed. He leaned against the door and smiled. This suite has everything. I made breakfast. Do you want to eat? I didn't know your taste, so I prepared both Chinese and Western food. He added, it's my first time making breakfast for a girl, so I must do you the honor. Lin Cece looked at him and looked around. Yi Mubai seemed to have thought of something. The clothes are in the bathroom. I asked my assistant to get them from Xiaohong. Thank you. Lin Cece bit her lip. She thought about what kind of rumors would spread about her relationship with Yi Mubai if she said that. However, she thought about it again. In fact, she did sleep on the same bed with Yi Mubai. Only they knew whether they did it or not. Other people liked EY. She forced a smile, jumped off the bed, and went into the bathroom. Yi Mubai looked at her little posture and smiled faintly. He turned around and walked into the small dining room. Lin Cece came out after changing her clothes. She also brushed her teeth and washed her face. She sat opposite Yi Mubai and smiled embarrassedly. I slept a little late. Director Chung is probably going to be angry. He must regret using me. Yi Mubai smiled. I called to say that you had an emergency. Lin Cece glared at him. You're not being honest. I've never said that I'm an honest man, but I'm a gentleman, right? When he said this, he looked at her with a smile. Lin Cece understood what he meant. She lowered her head and said nothing. Yi Mubai smiled again. Well, hurry up and eat. We still have to finish shooting in 2 days. Even if we're not in a hurry, we still have to take care of your aunt. She's waiting to see the lawyer. Lin Cece nodded and took the Chinese breakfast that he handed to her. Seeing that she was drinking peacefully, he said unhurriedly, Our family gathers once a month, and it's all Chinese food. There's no foreign flavor at all, and it's not allowed either. This habit of yours is pretty good. Her eyes widened. What are you talking about? Nothing. It's just that it's not easy to see my brother. He'll only be back for 2 days after the family gathering. I forgot to tell you that he's in the United States these days. Yi Mubai said very calmly. So if you want to see him, you have to go home with me. He admitted that he was a little despicable, but if he pursued a girl, especially a cold-hearted girl, and only sent flowers every day, he probably wouldn't be able to get her in this lifetime. Chapter 3165. After Yi Mubai finished speaking, Lin Cece looked at him with pure eyes. Looking at her gaze, he chuckled softly. Fine, it's my selfishness. Let's meet outside. I'll be the host. Only then did Lin Cece retract her gaze and continue to eat her breakfast in a refined manner. Yi Mubai looked at her submissive expression. He wanted to reach out and touch her hair, but after thinking about it, he decided against it. They finished their breakfast quickly and walked out of the hotel together. But unexpectedly, there were reporters from EZ at the entrance of the hotel. They were pointing their cameras at them. Yi Mubai, who was used to such situations, was stunned for a moment. He sighed. You didn't even wear sunglasses. Did you just admit it? Lin Cece was completely stunned. She looked at him. What did you say? Between admitting to a relationship and having a one-night stand, which one would you choose? Yi Mubai smiled bitterly. We can't deny it now. Lin Cece was still looking at him, but one of his arms was around her shoulders. Her little body was in his arms. She was shocked and embarrassed. She wanted to turn to look at him, but he held her head. Cece, just look in front. He whispered, You don't have to say anything. Just nod, okay? Lin Cece didn't say anything. He said again, Then I'll take it that you agree. After that, Yi Mubai looked at the reporters around and walked to the car in the parking lot with a smile. The reporters swarmed up. They wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. Mr. Yi, have you and Miss Lin Cece really decided to be together? When did you start? Did you meet each other yesterday or before? Don't you mind Miss Lin's past? She even had an affair with Mr. Gu of Hungtong not long ago. Was it a social occasion or an old love? The questions were asked one after another. They were very sharp. Yi Mubai immediately felt Lin Cece's fingers clench tightly. He reached out and placed his hand over her little fist, rubbing it lightly. However, his face still carried a 100% smile. It's precisely because Cece was misunderstood by the media that a kiss from a different angle caused your media to be in a mess. That's why I decided to go public. He lowered his head and looked at the obedient girl in his arms, saying softly, "I've been with her for a long time." The reporters were in an uproar. It turned out to be a long time, but there were still people who didn't let it go and continued to ask, "Do you mind if Lin Cece is with you?" Although they were both in the entertainment industry, Yimu Bai's status was much higher than Lin Cece's. So, in the eyes of ordinary people, Lin Cece's unbearable past was not worthy of Yimu Bai, a best actor with a clean background. Yimu Bai hugged Lin Cece tightly. When he faced the media again, the smile on his face was much lighter. "I'm mine because my heart ached for her. But I won't allow others to say that. I want to protect her for my whole life." After that, he looked very serious. "If there is a report that is not good for her, I will be the first to pursue it." It was the first time for those reporters to see the movie king like this. Although the movie king was easygoing in the past, he never got anything out of them. He just said hello and left, unlike today. Everyone was stunned and didn't come back to themselves for a while. And Yimu Bai had already got in the car with Lin Cece in his arms. He opened the door of the passenger seat and put one hand on top to protect her. Chapter 3166. What's wrong? Her heart was beating very fast, as if there was a little deer in the mouth of a bear. Yimu Bai's gaze was very deep, probably because of his long eyelashes, which made his eyes look very deep. She looked at him, watched him lean over, and then her lips were kissed by him. The soft lips touched, not deep, just a light touch. Her eyes opened a little wide. Yimu Bai chuckled softly. "Close your eyes. Someone is taking pictures." Not only did Lin Cece not close her eyes, but she also reached out and gently hugged his waist. The small kiss continued for about a minute. It was very sweet, but also a little immature. That was clearly the look of love. Yimu Bai let go of her, a faint smile on his handsome face. "Good acting. You're the one who taught me well." She also smiled lightly, feeling a lot more relaxed. She had to admit that Yimu Bai was a very relaxed person. He smiled, helped her into the car, turned around, opened the car door, and got in, ignoring the reporters. Their kiss was taken from various angles, and it immediately became a headline in the newspaper. The entertainment industry was in an uproar. The Yi family in B City was also in an uproar. In the hospital, Guze was also in an uproar, smashed to pieces. He quietly leaned against the bed, looking at the hot search headlines. 10 billion best actor falls in love with a B-list small star. When he opened it, it was the scene of Yimu Bai and Lin Cece kissing in front of the car. Yimu Bai was very serious, and his lowered eyes were full of gentle love. It meant that he liked her very much. Lin Cece's hands were also hugging his waist, and her little face was raised. It was a really beautiful scene. It was a picture of pure love. But last night, she ran over to him and asked, "Guze, do you still want me?" Guze smiled coldly. She was really capable. He didn't want her, but someone else immediately took over. He angrily threw the phone away. What did he care about? What was he unhappy about? She was just a woman who had nothing to do with him. She stared at the phone for a long time, then lifted the blanket and said to Su Qiaonan, who had rushed over, "Help me get discharged." Su Qiaonan was shocked and subconsciously said, "President Gu, your hand needs to be nurtured." "Am I President Gu, or are you President Gu?" Guze's tone wasn't very good. He walked inside and changed his clothes with one hand. Then he walked out on his own and headed outside. As for other matters, the secretary would handle it. Su Qiaonan froze for a moment and chased after him. He happened to run into the nurse, who came over to give him an 4-drip. The nurse's expression was very ugly. "What's wrong with the patients in the VIP ward? Don't think that life can be bought with money just because you have some money. At the very least, if your hand is crippled, you will be crippled. It's not something that can be cured even if you want to." Su Qiaonan glared at her. "How dare you say that about our President Gu? I'm going to lodge a complaint against you." The young nurse was not one to be trifled with. She said coldly, "Domestic slaves are no longer popular nowadays. Why do you, a woman of the new era, have to make yourself a slave?" After saying that, she turned around in disdain and said as she walked away, "Even our attending doctor can't bear the responsibility of being crippled." Then, she said fiercely, Rich people are so pretentious. Su Qiaonan couldn't stand it anymore and pulled the nurse over. Do you know what he has been through? She turned on the entertainment news. The woman he likes is with someone else. Can't he vent a little? Chapter 3167. Su Qiaonan looked at the nurse. What did you say? Lin Cece came last night. She stood at the door and asked your President Gu if he wanted her. When she walked out, she looked dejected. She must have been rejected. Now it seems that women are not the only ones who say one thing but mean another. Your President Gu is also one of them. Don't call her President Gu in the future. Just call her Miss Gu. The nurse was also very eloquent. Although Su Qiaonan was angry, he was even more shocked. Lin Cece had come. Lin Cece wanted to go back. President Gu rejected her, but President Gu's reaction clearly showed that he was very concerned about the relationship between Yi Mubai and Lin Cece. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a big reaction. But why did he reject her? There was a look of shock on her face. The young nurse put on her signature cold and elegant smile again. Of course. Do you think every woman will wait at the same place? Dream on. She was about to leave when she looked up and saw Gu Zhe standing at the door. The nurse and Su Qiaonan were stunned, especially Su Qiaonan, who called out uneasily, President Gu? Gu Zhe looked much better. He said calmly, I'm here to get my phone. Go through the procedures. The helicopter will be here soon. Su Qiaonan was stunned again. He didn't want to stay in Sea City even for a moment. Was it because of Lin Cece? No, it was because Lin Cece and Yi Mubai were together. Su Qiaonan's gaze was a little deep. He quietly went to handle the procedures. The nurse still had some integrity. She saw Gu Zhe standing in front of the window, smoking, and walked over. Mr. Gu, your hand has to be treated when you return to B City. Otherwise, there will be side effects even if you don't become disabled. Now that we still have time, let me help you clean the wound. It won't be good if it gets infected. Gu Zhe had a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't look like a patient at all. He looked outside with his back to the young nurse. After listening to her words, he asked in return, Am I very pretentious? However, the young nurse came over directly and deftly changed the dressing with his hands hanging down. She still answered his question kindly. Yes, but I won't die if I don't do it. She grinned. Right now, your heart is more painful than the wound on your hand. By the way, the wound on your hand is also an emotional wound. Why do you have to do this? Why didn't you say that you liked him? Instead, you let him take advantage of you. The young nurse muttered to herself again. If I had to choose, I would also choose the gentle and considerate Yi Mubai, not the eccentric one like you. Gu Zhe looked down. I'm weird. Yeah, why don't you know? Although I don't understand your past, I can tell at a glance that you two used to be together. You're the dominant one, and she always accommodates you. The young nurse's voice was much gentler, and she was comforting him like a friend. They were patients. It was fine if they were physically ill, but it would be troublesome if they were mentally ill. This was especially so for this kind of man with status. Once he was mentally ill, he would play with acquisitions and cause many companies to go bankrupt. This would cause social panic, and many people would lose their jobs. The young nurse felt that she was saving mankind. Gu Zhe's gaze became gentler, and he said lightly, She's not her. What? The young nurse didn't understand. Gu Zhe didn't want to continue chatting with her, so he stayed silent. The young nurse couldn't shut her mouth. She coughed lightly. Since she's already with someone else, don't think about it. It's useless to think about it. Chapter 3168. Seeing that Gu Zhe was deep in thought, the nurse didn't say anything else. After a while, the nurse said quietly, Mr. Gu, if you really like her, you could try to get her back. She paused and coughed lightly. Even if they had sex, no one would care about that now, right? These words were like a knife stabbing into Gu Zhe's heart. His expression instantly turned ugly. The nurse added fuel to the fire. Didn't they stay in the same hotel? The girl was rejected so badly by you, and with someone comforting her, it's normal for something to happen. Don't mind it. She sized up Gu Zhe and smiled. Even someone like President Gu can't keep his chastity, right? Gu Zhe looked at her and said calmly, I don't have a woman. After saying that, he felt that he was crazy. Why did he have to say this to someone he had nothing to do with? The nurse laughed. That means you still love her. Otherwise, why don't you have a woman? Guze was stunned again, but this time, he didn't speak to the nurse anymore. He just smoked quietly. After the nurse left, Su Qiaonan came back. He didn't look too good. President Gu, the paperwork is done. You have to undergo physical therapy when you return to B City, she said very slowly. Otherwise, you might not be able to hold heavy objects in the future. Guze understood what she meant. He smiled and said calmly, I haven't lost my mind. With that, he put away the cigarette and turned to leave. When he walked out, his body relaxed a little. He thought about what he had come to see City for. He knew that Lin Cece was here, but he still came. He clearly had something on his mind, but now that he had come, he had made a mess of things. He asked himself, when Lin Cece asked him if he still wanted her, was he really not moved at all? Didn't he want to say yes at all? Didn't he want to hug her at all? At that time, he was jealous and angry because she had kissed Yimu Bai. So when she said those words, he chased her away mercilessly. As he wished, she had left and was with Yimu Bai. After Guze walked out, Su Qiaonan hurriedly followed him and whispered, President Gu, the plane is ready. Guze nodded and stepped into the elevator. Su Qiaonan also followed carefully. In the elevator, she didn't dare to make a sound because her boss didn't look good. It wasn't until they got into the car that Guze said in a low voice, to this address. He gave an address to the driver. The driver was a little surprised, and Su Qiaonan was even more so. She looked at Guze for a long time without saying anything. After a long time, the car turned and she said, Master Gu, I'm Gu. Guze, on the other hand, closed his eyes slightly and leaned against the back seat. He said indifferently, I have to give up after watching it. These words shocked Su Qiaonan. Did President Gu realize what he had said? The meaning of his words could not be clearer. President Gu still liked Lin Cece. Whether it was the little fool from before or the current Lin Cece, he actually liked both of them. Of course, Su Qiaonan did not dare to disobey Guze's words, unless she was prepared to give up this million-dollar job. She sat in the car, silently, until the car stopped in front of a certain villa. Chapter 31:69. She tilted her head and wanted to say something, but Guze had already opened the door and got out of the car. The crew had already started work. Lin Cece and Yimu Bai had also changed their clothes. Although they were wearing the same clothes as yesterday, they looked even more like a couple today. At this moment, they were filming a kissing scene. Lin Cece was gently held in Yimu Bai's arms. He lowered his head and kissed her softly, bit by bit. Because this was a motion commercial, the director requested for a deep kiss. Moreover, it was not a fake kiss. This was actually normal in commercials, as long as both parties did not feel uncomfortable. Of course, Yimu Bai had no problem with it. Lin Cece felt that he was considered a gentleman. Moreover, it was for the sake of work. Although this was the first time they kissed for real, she did not object. Hence, under everyone's gazes, she and Yimu Bai kissed deeply. It was not very intense, but it was very lingering. Guze stood at the entrance of the villa and watched as her fingers sank deep into the fabric of Yimu Bai's shoulder. Her cheeks were slightly sunken. Guze thought of the oral activity and clenched his fingers tightly. Then he closed his eyes. You're the one who doesn't want her. She's with someone else. Actually, it has nothing to do with you. He suddenly turned around and walked to the car. He opened the door, and Su Qiaonan followed him. It was also at that moment that Lin Cece saw him. She did not chase after him. Instead, she looked at him quietly. Do you want to go over? Maybe he's here to look for you. Yimu Bai's voice was still gentle, without a trace of reluctance. Lin Cece looked away and lowered her little face. No need. The director did not see Guze. He shouted, Why aren't you kissing? It was a good kiss just now. It was very real. He muttered in his heart, Those who have been on the bed are indeed different. He shouted one more time, Don't give up halfway. Otherwise, old Bai, you will pass even if you shoot 10 scenes today. Yimu Bai smiled. Okay, this was supposed to be done in one take, but for some reason, either he or Lin Cece was not in a good state that day. In the end, they took 7 to 8 takes and kissed for more than an hour. Director Chung was an idiot. Since the reporters had already written about the incident last night, he might as well add fuel to the fire and reveal the kissing scene. Therefore, the top 3 most searched topics were Yi Mu-bai and Lin Cici's fake act. For a moment, he was put on the spot. After the kissing scene, Lin Cici's tongue was numb at night. Yi Mu-bai looked at her and smiled. "Sorry, are you okay now?" Lin Cici pointed at her lips in order to make herself feel uncomfortable. "Are you all right?" He smiled. "It's just a bite or two. It's nothing serious." Lin Cici smiled and looked at him. "I have something to tell you." He held her wrist and brought her to his car. It wasn't a nanny van, but his usual one. "Let's talk in the car. I'll take you to dinner." Lin Cici wanted to break free, but he did not let her. His gaze quietly fell on her face. "Cici, I'm serious." She quietly got into the car and buckled her seatbelt before saying softly, "I know, but I don't dare to be serious anymore." Chapter 3170. Yi Mu-bai held the steering wheel and thought for a moment. "Cici, I understand what you're thinking." He reached out to stroke her hair. "Can you treat me like Lanyu? I'm just taking care of you. When the day comes that you feel that I'm reliable, that I'm the person you can entrust the rest of your life to, tell me." He smiled again. "Don't say it. I can feel it myself." That was a perfect word of love. Lin Cici looked at him and couldn't say no. Yi Mu-bai smiled and had dinner with her alone before sending her back to the hotel. Lin Cici got out of the car and found that he didn't move. She couldn't help asking him, "Aren't you going to get out?" Yi Mu-bai said gently, "I'm not staying in the hotel tonight." "Where are you staying?" Lin Cici blurted out. Yi Mu-bai smiled. "I'm staying in my villa. Do you want to visit it? Or it doesn't matter if we stay for one night. Anyway, we're boyfriend and girlfriend in the outside world." He saw her expression change slightly, so he smiled again. "I promise I won't do anything." "No." Lin Cici smiled weakly. "I'm a little tired." He looked at her with burning eyes for a long time. He seemed to understand something, so he smiled. "Okay, good night." Lin Cici got out of the car, but he still got out. He looked at her under the night sky. "Cici." She turned to look at him with a slight smile. "What's wrong?" "I forgot something." Yi Mu-bai walked over quickly. As soon as he stopped, he lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. A goodnight kiss. Lin Cici was slightly stunned, but she didn't push him away. Yi Mu-bai quickly withdrew his hand and looked at her gently. "I'm leaving." She stood at the entrance of the hall and said, He didn't leave immediately, but looked at her attentively. After a while, he chuckled. "Kiss me again." Before she could resist, he had kissed her again. It was still on the forehead. He was a very smart man. He knew how to not make her feel disgusted. The forehead was acceptable to her, so he kissed her a few more times. After kissing her, he chuckled. "I'm really leaving. Quickly go in, it's cold at night." Lin Cici nodded and took 2 steps back. Then she walked inside. At first, she walked, but then she walked faster and faster. She was actually running. Yi Mu-bai looked at her back and smiled. He turned back to open the car door and got in. He was in a good mood. He didn't tell Lin Cici that he was going to see Yi Mulin, his big brother lawyer. Yi Mulin was originally going to return to Be City directly, but he was invited to see City by Yi Mu-bai. It had to be said that only his own younger brother would have this kind of face for a big lawyer like Yi Mulin. Yi Mu-bai smiled and started the car. That night, he first went to see Yi Mulin and sorted out the matter with Annie Lee. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, Yi Mulin had to return to Be City because he had something to do. When he left, he looked at his younger brother, the best actor, and reached out to pat him on the shoulder. "You're in such a hurry to leave that you don't even want to send me to the airport." She glanced at him again. "Are you in a hurry to see that girl with the surname Lin?" Yi Mu-bai just smiled and didn't say anything. In the end, Yi Mulin still sighed. "I don't object to you liking me. It's rare for you to like someone. In the past, my parents and I all thought that you liked men, so we didn't do anything for so many years." Chapter 3171. Yi Mulin patted him on the shoulder. "I was afraid that you couldn't forget the one before." Now that Xiao Bai had come out, he couldn't be happier. Yi Mubai was unhappy when he heard this. I was young and didn't know much. I didn't like her very much. I heard that she's also coming back from America, and she's still single. Mubai, think carefully about which one you want to choose, the new lover or the old one. That one still has you in her heart, and her family is beneficial to our family. As for the other Miss Lin, if it was in the past, her family would never object, but you know what kind of situation her family is in now. Yi Mulin said as he patted Mubai's shoulder. No matter what, I respect you. Yi Mubai smiled. I understand. It's good that you really understand. Yi Mulin walked to the black limousine at the door. He was a lawyer with a prominent family, and the limousine was a Lincoln Stretch limousine, which matched his identity. Yi Mubai stood there and smoked for a long time before he returned to the hotel where the crew was staying. He didn't catch up on sleep and went straight to work. Others didn't know, but Lin Cece could see that Yi Mubai was very tired. Out of concern, she asked softly, You didn't sleep last night? Yi Mubai was resting with her. After hearing her words, he smiled gently. Yes, I was busy all night. His words were a little ambiguous, which would make people think of that place. Lin Cece looked at him. Yi Mubai couldn't help laughing. I lied to you. My brother came over last night and chatted all night. Although he said it vaguely, Lin Cece could feel that he did all this for Auntie Lee. To put it bluntly, if it weren't for her, he wouldn't care about Auntie Lee's affairs. Therefore, when he said it casually, it was as if he was offering a huge favor. Lin Cece felt very embarrassed. Yi Mubai looked at her and asked tentatively, If you really feel that you owe me a favor, will you treat me to dinner? Lin Cece looked up at him. Do you want to catch up on sleep? It's nothing. Yi Mubai smiled. I'm just afraid that you won't. Lin Cece smiled slightly. Why wouldn't I? But you didn't sleep last night. How about we eat at the restaurant on the first floor? What do you think? Yi Mubai smiled faintly. Of course. Since it was said, the dinner was very enjoyable, and Lin Cece temporarily forgot those unhappy things. As for her and Yi Mubai, she thought that he would give up after a few days. If Yi Mubai was a little more ordinary, she might really accept it, but his family was too prominent, and she was no longer a naive little girl. After shooting the commercial, they rested for a while and returned to B City early the next morning. Yi Mubai's car came to pick them up at the airport. The auntie felt very uneasy and felt that she had troubled him. Lin Cece patted the back of her hand to comfort her. Yi Mubai was very considerate. Since it was business, he arranged to meet Yi Mulin at his law firm. They went in, and Yi Mulin's secretary welcomed them warmly. She even said a few witty words to Yi Mubai. It could be seen that the relationship between the Yi brothers was really good, and they often walked together. However, the secretary looked at Lin Cece again and paid special attention to her. Miss Lin, this is the black tea that lawyer Yi specially asked me to prepare for you. It's different from the others, she said with a gentle smile. Chapter 3172. Yi Mubai is very comfortable and smiles. It's rare for him to be considerate. The secretary squints her eyes. It's because of you. These words are a little explicit. Lin Cece can only hold the black tea and drink it slowly to dispel the uneasiness. Yi Mubai looks at her, and his eyes are a little warm. Then he looks at the secretary. When will lawyer Yi be free? Before the secretary answers, a calm voice comes from the door. It's not like you to be so impatient as soon as you come back. Lin Cece and others quickly put down the cups in their hands and look over. There is a slender figure at the door. The man who looks very similar to Yi Mubai must be Yi Mulin. Anli stands up unconsciously. Hello, lawyer Yi. Yi Mulin makes a gesture for her to sit down, and he sits down next to Yi Mubai with a smile. Mubai told me about your daughter's case the night before yesterday. I have a general understanding, but some details still need to be seen by the person involved. He ponders for a moment and raises his eyes. How many days will I be here? The secretary smiles. You come back to accompany Mr. Yi for dinner, and you can go back to America at any time. Yi Mulin smiles slightly. Then I'll leave the day after tomorrow. He looks at Lin Cece. Don't worry, leave your aunt to me. I will take good care of her. Lin Cece is stunned. She wants to say that she can go with him, but she also thinks that saying this may offend lawyer Yi, so she swallows the words that are on the tip of her tongue. When she's in a dilemma, the aunt says, Cece, I can go by myself. You have a job, don't force yourself. In fact, the aunt doesn't want to bother Lin Cece, but she hears something from Lawyer Ye's words. He wants Cece to stay for Yi Mubai. Isn't Yi Mubai pursuing Cece? If Cece goes to America with him, what's the point? The aunt is a reasonable person, so she persuades Lin Cece not to go with him. She just smiles softly. Of course I don't worry, but Lawyer Yi, we can't take advantage of the lawyer's fee. It should be as much as it should be. Yi Mulin smiled and looked at his brother. Mubai, how much do you think is appropriate? This question wasn't very businesslike, but Yi Mubai was used to it. I'll take your lowest discount. Therefore, Yi Mulin said calmly, the case is over. 1 million. Thinking it was dollar, Lin Cece nodded in agreement, knowing that it was a reasonable price. But Yi Mulin added, RMB. Lin Cece felt uneasy. She looked at Yi Mubai, then at Yi Mulin. That's too little. Yi Mubai patted the back of her hand and smiled. How can there be a fool like you? Do you really want him to name a frighteningly large number? He asked her to go out. Lin Cece thought about it and went out. Yi Mubai looked at the door and whispered, 1 million is already a big favor for Annie. If it's 8 million, how do you expect her to pay you back? Lin Cece was startled and said subconsciously, I didn't want her to return it. Chapter 3173. Lin Cece glared at him. Why did you say that about him? Yes, I did. Yi Mubai smiled. That's it. In fact, this case is very simple. The key is that Aunt Lee has no background. My brother's connections can help her. Other things are not a problem. Hearing his words, Lin Cece breathed a sigh of relief. Then she looked at him. Really? Well, don't worry. Yi Mubai smiled slightly. But shouldn't you treat me to a meal for such a big favor? Lin Cece also laughed. Of course we have to. Are you willing to treat me for a month? Yi Mubai said casually, I have no other work this month, so I'll stay in City B. I heard that you also treat me for a month. How about being my companion? I'll take you out to play. In fact, Lin Cece wanted to go back to City A to accompany her parents. Besides, she didn't dare to be so close to Yi Mubai. The scandal outside was already very hot. If she hung out with him for a month, as if knowing her scruples, Yi Mubai reached out to hold her hand and smiled lightly. Didn't I say that I'm lying you? Are you afraid of that? I will never force you to do anything you don't like. While saying this, he looked at her delicate little face and coughed slightly. At most, I'll kiss your forehead. She could afford this benefit, so she agreed. You don't have any hope. Yi Mubai, you know my past. Her voice was a little lighter. I can't touch someone with a background like yours. She looked at him deeply. Yi Mubai smiled warmly. I see. At this time, Yi Mulin came out. He leaned against the door and looked at his brother lazily. Mubai, don't forget to go home for dinner tonight. Dad said that you are busier than manager E now. He can't see you for a month. Yi Mubai laughed. I'll go back tonight. Yi Mulin's gaze fell on Lin Cece's face for a while, before he moved it away. He added, if you have a girlfriend, bring her home. Otherwise, Shirley will think that you have been waiting for her. That will be troublesome. Yi Mubai was a little annoyed, but he couldn't show it in front of Lin Cece. He touched his nose and said, don't mention it. It happened many years ago. Yi Mulin lit a cigarette, and the pure gold lighter made a crisp sound. He smiled. Just take it as me saying one more thing. It's good that you know what you're doing. He looked at Lin Cece meaningfully and said, our family is different. Don't regret it. After saying that, he went upstairs and went to his office. This time, Lin Cece felt a little uncomfortable, but her relationship with Yi Mubai had not reached that point, so it was not appropriate for her to ask about other people's privacy. She just said softly, call me when you want to eat. It's my treat. Yi Mubai smiled bitterly. The lawyer's words still affected you, didn't they? Lin Cece shook her head. No, but I felt a little uncomfortable, as if I was standing in the way. Yi Mubai sighed. I said you were affected. He reached out to hold her hand and whispered, it's true. It was 15 or 16 years ago. It's been so long that I almost forgot it. Lin Cece looked at him. Yimubai smiled. We grew up together. It was my first love. Lin Cece asked in a low voice, have you ever had sex? Chapter 3174. Lin Cece smiled embarrassedly and looked at him. Oh, by the way, I'm going to see my aunt. She will go to the United States with Lawyer Yi in 2 days, and there are some things to prepare. Yimubai's eyes were deep. Look, this is the attitude of escaping again. Lin Cece was even more embarrassed and looked around. I can't let my aunt wait too long. She wanted to go, but he reached out and grabbed her wrist, just gently. Let's have dinner together tonight? She just made a deal, and she couldn't refuse him like this, so she nodded. Okay. Yimubai smiled. If I come to see you every day, will you be annoyed? No. Lin Cece was a little weak when she said it. She didn't know why she became like this now. She owed him a big favor, and it seemed that she would feel guilty if she refused. However, Bai was a good person, and it was quite easy to get along with him. Yimubai looked at her and got closer, his voice low and hoarse. I really don't want to force you. I don't want to force you. Lin Cece shook her little head, and soon realized that he was teasing her, so she bit her lip, and the little angry look was very cute in his eyes. He reached out and touched her hair gently. Go ahead. It will take half a day to prepare. I will pick you up at night, and don't bring a third wheel. Lin Cece couldn't help laughing. Yimubai looked at her deeply for a while, and then urged her to go back to the reception room. At the same time, the relationship between Yimubai and Lin Cece set off a storm in the entertainment circle, the financial circle, and even the political circle. The backgrounds of Yimubai and Lin Cece were all dug out. They were really a good match, but it was a pity that the Lin family failed. But now the two were as good as honey. All kinds of reports came out, and there were pictures of Yimubai kissing Lin Cece on various occasions. Every expression and every look could be seen that he was different from when he was acting in the past. Guze stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the president's office, and there were several newspapers scattered on the sofa beside him, each of which was the headline of Yimubai and Lin Cece kissing. He stood, listening to Su Qiaonan's work report, and gave instructions lightly. After saying that, Su Qiaonan also noticed the newspaper on the sofa. He was stunned, but not surprised. Of course, she didn't dare to ask about Guze's private affairs anymore. If she did, she might not be able to stay in the company anymore. Su Qiaonan left quietly, and Guze remained standing. The only difference was that it was quiet behind him, and he could think about some things. After a long time, his phone rang. He took a look and saw that it was Qin Mo. Why is he looking for me? Ever since he saw Qin Mo and Lin Cece flirting in the parking lot, Guze had a bad impression of Qin Mo from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't tell if it was because of Lin Cece. He pursed his lips and picked up the call. President Qin, what's up? Qin Mo smiled faintly. Can't I look for you for no reason? Guze smiled faintly. You don't come to the temple for no reason. Go ahead. If I just want to have a drink with you, will you do me the honor? Don't talk about me and Lin Cece. It's all hype. You know that I have a wife. Qin Mo touched his nose and said embarrassedly. Guze smiled. Really? How many times have you had sex with her after you got married? Will she still let you touch her? Chapter 3175. Qin Mo said unhappily, when you and Lin Cece divorced, I didn't kick you when you were down. Guze's face darkened. I have nothing to do with Lin Cece. Qin Mo sneered. Who are you trying to fool? You have nothing to do with Lin Cece. Don't tell me you used to have little fool written on your household register. As he said this, Guze thought of something. He didn't want to argue with Qin Mo any further, so he asked the truth. Where are you having dinner? I'll go. Qin Mo laughed. That's right. We both don't have a wife to warm our bed. Let's not hurt each other. Then he gave the address seriously and set the time for 7 o'clock in the evening. Guze hung up immediately, took his coat and car keys, and walked out. Su Qiaonan immediately came up to him. President Gu, you have a meeting to attend later. Cancel it, Guze said without hesitation. Su Qiaonan looked a little embarrassed. She knew very well why President Gu had been so moody recently. It was all because of Lin Cece. On the other side, Guze went downstairs and got into the car. He didn't go to the hospital because of his hand injury, but he couldn't drive. Sitting in the car, he closed his eyes and said to the driver, "Go back to the villa." The driver started the car immediately. The car didn't slow down, but Guze suddenly said, "Drive faster." The driver said in a muffled voice, "Okay." The car immediately rushed out like an arrow and stopped in front of the villa where Guze lived alone. Guze opened the door and got out of the car. He asked the driver to go back first and walked upstairs quickly. The servants were a little surprised. "Sir, why are you back at this time?" Guze didn't say anything and just ran upstairs. When he reached the study, he opened a drawer and found his household register. He flipped to a page and saw the words Lin Cece written on the spouse column. This was what he was anxious to deny and what he wanted to deny. But at this moment, when he looked at these 3 words, he gently caressed them. Lin Cece stood at the door of his ward and asked him softly, "Guze, do you still want me?" What did he say back then? He said what Lin Yabai's family was like, and that Lin Cece shouldn't overestimate herself. However, she was still in his household register. No matter how much he refused to admit that she was not a little fool, these 3 words were enough to prove that she was that person. Guze suddenly closed his eyes. The lines that were like sculptures were stretched taut, as if they were about to shatter in the next second. He looked at the 3 words and was shocked to realize that her household registration was still under his name. This feeling was indescribable. It was as if he had suddenly taken a sip of ice water in the middle of summer. It was cool and refreshing and very comfortable. But this comfort ended at dinner. Chinemo and Guze actually arrived at the restaurant at the same time. 2 good-looking men appearing together was naturally very eye-catching, especially since they were equally noble and had outstanding temperaments. Guze sat down. One of his hands was injured, so he only had one hand to use. He leisurely held a cigarette and glanced at Chin-mo as he ordered. After a while, Guze felt that the surrounding gazes fell on them. They were a little eager and probing. He glanced around and knew in his heart. It was a little strange for 2 men to enter this kind of restaurant. It was easy to be treated as a couple. Chapter 3176. You don't like it? I thought it was suitable for people like us who don't have wives. We should come here to watch other people show off their love so that we can find someone to warm the quilt with. Chinemo chuckled. Guze smiled. Don't you have a wife? Why? Are you getting a divorce? Come on. Chinemo handed the menu to the waiter and said calmly, "My marriage with Yi Huan is a platonic one." As soon as he finished speaking, Guze couldn't help but laugh. He looked at him and said, "Chinemo, when did you become so thick-skinned? Were you sick? I heard that people who abstain from sex for too long will have a weird personality." Chinemo slapped his hand away and coldly snorted, "How are you any better than me? I want to ask you, is that fiancé of yours just a decoration?" Guze was stunned. Warmth was unimportant to him. It was an appropriate adjective to say that she was just a decoration. He remained silent. Chin-mo smiled. "Let's not talk about this. Let's talk about something else." At this time, the waiter brought the dishes over. Guze leaned back and smiled. "I don't know what else we can talk about." Chin-mo raised his glass and smiled. He was about to say something when he saw the beautiful couple in front of him. He coughed and said, "For example, let's talk about an actress from our company. What a coincidence. She and Yimubai are here for dinner." Guze's body froze. Chin-mo said kindly, "Oh, by the way, Yimubai and you are old friends, right? You grew up in the same courtyard, right? It's better to avoid this kind of thing. Otherwise, don't greet her." Guze was enraged by his words, and his eyes became gloomy. "You knew they were here?" Chin-mo played with the lighter and smiled. "I'm not here to catch them in the act. How would I know?" Looking at Guze's darkened face, he smiled again. "It's just a coincidence." At this point, Guze would be a fool to believe his nonsense. He curled his lips into a cold smile. On the other hand, Yimubai and Lin Cece didn't notice them because there was a screen between each seat, so they wouldn't notice if they didn't pay attention. However, he couldn't ignore her now that he was close, not to mention that they were sitting next to each other. When Yi Bai helped Lin Cece to sit down, he noticed the two men sitting at the opposite table. He was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and greeted them. Guze, Chinamo, although Yi Bai was in the entertainment circle, he had a good family background. Who would dare to offend him? It was just like how Lin Cece used to be interested in Qin Shun. Even though Qin Shun was a woman, he had to deal with her. Yi Bai's father was now sitting in the former seat of Lin Cece's father. One could imagine how high his status was. As he said this, Qin Mo and Gu Zhe couldn't be too cold. In the end, it was Qin Mo who made the decision. Let's eat together. Gu Zhe took another look at him. Did he really not know beforehand? Qin Mo just smiled faintly and then went to greet Lin Cece. Cece, come and sit. They were indescribably familiar. They didn't look like a boss and an artist at all. Yi Bai didn't feel jealous. He let them sit on one side with Qin Mo, and he sat with Gu Zhe. However, Lin Cece was sitting face-to-face with him, so he avoided some discomfort. But eating at the same table, what could they avoid? Chapter 31:77. Lin Cece was drinking a cup of hot red bean paste when she heard that. Her body stiffened, and she looked up into Gu Zhe's eyes. She slowly straightened her body, and her gaze inadvertently swept past Yi Bai. Yi Bai smiled, as if he didn't care. Lin Cece lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Then I'll move out when I have time." Qin Mo smiled and looked at Gu Zhe fearlessly. "That's true. You're already divorced, so it's weird to be in the same household register." Gu Zhe gritted his teeth. Yes. His gaze fell on Lin Cece's face, and he said expressionlessly, "If you have time, come and get the household register. It's better to move out as soon as possible and clarify things." Qin Mo added, "That's right, we can't not be clear about it. Now that Lao Bai is chasing Cece, my good brother is avoiding her. Otherwise, it would be inappropriate for us to be unclear about it." Gu Zhe was about to explode. He glared at Qin Mo took a sip of wine and smiled. During the meal, Gu Zhe and Lin Cece felt uncomfortable. Yi Bai and Qin Mo got along very well. After all, one was a best actor and the other was the CEO of King Entertainment. They could always talk together. From their conversation, Lin Cece found out that Yi Bai actually had a few companies doing venture capital. He had good foresight and invested in a few movies, which made his stock rise. Qin Mo even said with a smile that he had never seen a male actor who could make more money than Lao Bai. Yi Bai said modestly, "It's just a small investment. Acting is my hobby." Qin Mo found it funny. He gently swirled the red wine in his glass and accidentally shook it on Lin Cece's clothes. He said in surprise, "Sorry." Lin Cece was wearing a pure white dress and a trench coat. She didn't wear a coat during the meal, so the red wine on the white was very eye-catching. Qin Mo was her boss. Even if she guessed that he did it on purpose, what could she do? Thus, he smiled faintly and said, "I'm going to clean up." As he spoke, he got up and walked toward the bathroom. Qin Mo looked at Yi Bai. "Aren't you going to see her? Hand me a tissue or something." Yi Bai smiled. "Not to that extent yet. It's not that bad. Were those kisses fake?" Qin Mo added fuel to the fire. As soon as he finished speaking, Gu Zhe got up and walked towards the bathroom. Yi Bai leisurely poured himself a glass of wine and gently swirled it. "Qin Mo, when did you become so bored?" Qin Mo acted as if it was none of his business. "It probably started when you chased after Lin Cece." He moved his body forward. "Do you believe that they still have a chance?" Yi Bai looked into Qin Mo's eyes and smiled faintly. "How do you know?" "Intuition." Qin Mo added, "A month or two ago, it was so intense that they rolled around in bed. I don't believe you if you say they've forgotten about it. Old Bai, I'm telling you sincerely, don't get involved. Otherwise, you might be the one who gets hurt in the end." He smiled. "You may not know that it was a flash marriage. Gu Zhe married her regardless of everything. Later, they separated because of some things. I think Gu Zhe can't let it go. Cece, you should know that she can't let it go since you are with her. Old Bai, why bother getting involved with them? It won't do you any good." Yi Bai smiled. "Since they can't let it go, why don't they be together? After so many years, some things have lost the best opportunity." Chapter 3178. Yimubai smiled slightly and looked at Qin Mo. The one who hasn't given up is Guzei. As for me, I just can't help it. Qin Mo thought about it carefully. That's true. He added, why don't you go and take a look? Yimubai insisted on the aperitif and said lightly, why would I go? Qin Mo, I'm not that petty. Besides, it's not like you don't know my and Guzei's background. If Cece and I are together, we will inevitably meet. Rather than in the future, why don't we just say it now? Qin Mo smiled. You're quite right. He blinked. Are you serious? Yimubai looked at Qin Mo and said slowly, that's a strange question. As he said this, he slowly put down the glass in his hand and asked seriously, what do you mean by appearing with Guzei today? Qin Mo smiled lightly. What do you think it means? Yimubai's voice became lower. It's my father's idea, right? Qin Mo was a very resourceful person. He had connections in both the political and business circles and had a close relationship with the Yi family. After he said this, Qin Mo sighed slightly and said frankly, I'm doing it for Cece. He looked at Yimubai. To be honest, you're just a man in your early 30s and you don't have to worry about me. But Cece, you know the relationship between Qin Shun and Cece, not to mention Lanyu. So I don't agree with you and Cece. Of course, Old Bai, this is not because of you, but because of your background. Otherwise, why do you think Guzei and Cece's marriage was kept a secret, and why did they end up divorcing? Since Qin Mo had already said it, he might as well be more straightforward. Also, it's good that you like Cece, but is there really no problem with your family? We'll talk about it after it's been settled. Yimubai lowered his head and gently played with the cup in his hand. He then looked up at Qin Mo and smiled slightly. It seems that my father and you have talked quite thoroughly. He didn't say anything else. He just stared at the cup in a daze. Since the conversation had reached this point, Qin Mo naturally wouldn't say anything more uninteresting. After a while, Yimubai said softly, I'm already in my 30s, and I'm used to seeing the ups and downs of life. I don't really care about some things. It's mainly up to Cece. Qin Mo's heart skipped a beat. He raised his eyes and looked at him bitterly. Is this considered a confession? Yimubai just smiled and said nothing. Qin Mo didn't ask again. It's good that you've thought it through. Yimubai raised his glass. Let's not talk about this anymore. It's rare to meet and have a drink. Qin Mo looked at him, smiled, shook his head, and clinked glasses with him. At the door of the washroom, Lin Cece slowly washed her hands. Her mind was a little messy. She didn't expect to meet Guzei here. Furthermore, Guzei and Qin Mo were together. It was strange for two men to eat in such a place. Lin Cece wasn't stupid. After thinking about it, she realized that it was probably Qin Mo's arrangement. She looked down. After washing her hands, she was about to leave when she inadvertently saw Guzei in the mirror. He was leaning against the wall, his gaze quietly landing on her face. It was as calm as water. Chapter 3179. Her face suddenly turned pale, and she stared at him silently for a few seconds, even forgetting to breathe. Guzei's gaze fell on her face, and he seemed to be staring at her. After a few seconds, Lin Cece retracted her gaze and walked towards the corridor without saying a word to him. Guzei stopped her. She looked up at this man with a sour gaze, and her body was so tense that it seemed like it would break in the next second. Guzei took another step forward, and his body was very close to her. She was really petite, and her height was at his shoulder. She didn't want to show weakness in front of him, so she didn't step back, so the two of them were very close to each other, and it looked very intimate. Is there anything, Mr. Gu? Lin Cece's voice was very soft. If there's nothing, I'm going back to the restaurant. Guzei didn't answer her, but asked instead, Mr. Gu? Lin Cece suddenly looked up, and there was a little sharpness in her eyes, but it disappeared after a while, and no one noticed it. But Guzei caught it, and the corner of his mouth raised in a mocking smile. Don't you always call me Guzei? Lin Cece lowered her eyes. Really? Then I won't call you wrong in the future. In the future? Guzei looked at her condescendingly. Do you still want to see me in the future? Lin Cece finally took a step back and looked up at him with a trace of defiance in her eyes. B-City is only so big, and it's not impossible to meet by chance. Mr. Gu, why are you making things difficult for me? Making things difficult? Guze played with this word, and he smiled. You went to the hospital a few days ago, and you made things difficult for me. His smile was sour, and there was a trace of self-contempt hidden in it. He didn't know why he was making things difficult for her. He was the one who said no, and now he was blocking her at the door of the bathroom. What was this? As he said this, Lin Cece's face turned pale again, but after a while, she smiled lightly and said absent-mindedly, "Did I make things difficult for Mr. Gu? I don't think so." With that said, she took a deep breath. "Since you said no, there's no need to pester me anymore. Besides, you've already found someone to take over, haven't you?" he asked sharply. Lin Cece stared at him with tears in her eyes, but she didn't reply. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward. In Guze's eyes, her silence was a tacit agreement, so his face became even uglier. He lit a cigarette and said, "What's so good about him? Are you good in bed?" As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Cece slapped him in the face. This time, it was a little powerful, and the sound was exceptionally crisp. After she was done, Lin Cece was a little dazed as well. Her arm was numb. She said stiffly, "Please move aside." He did not give way and continued to block the way. "Get out of my way." Lin Cece's voice became a little sharp, and then an arm grabbed her. In the next second, she was pressed against the wall of the washroom, and his hot lips were pressed against her neck. He bit down lightly, but it wasn't a love jade. Instead, there was a hint of threat. "Have you slept with him?" Lin Cece's entire body was cold. She suddenly felt a chill. Perhaps in Guze's heart, she was just this cheap. All the men that she had been with, and therefore knew she had slept with them. She should be angry and furious, but she laughed instead. As she laughed, she looked up at the handsome man in front of her. To be precise, it should be her ex-husband. Chapter 3180. Without waiting for Guze to respond, she said, "Not only Yimu Bai, but also many others. I've slept with all the men you saw in the newspaper, and all of them are much better than Mr. Gu in bed." As soon as she finished speaking, he grabbed her by the neck. When she looked at Guze again, his eyes were filled with darkness. "Lin Cece." He gritted his teeth. "Are you shameless? Does it have anything to do with Mr. Gu?" Lin Cece slapped his hand away. She breathed heavily and said word by word, "I look down on you." These few words were like a curse that affected him, arousing the anger in his body and mind. Before Guze could react, he had kissed her lips. It was a punishing kiss, a kiss with a sweet smell of blood. Lin Cece's eyes widened, and she looked at him in disbelief. She shook her head desperately to avoid his kiss, but he always had a way to entangle her and drive straight into her. The most intimate contact made her feel ashamed and angry, so she bit him regardless. Almost immediately, Guze let go of her. Under the warm light, they stared at each other, and their hearts were beating rapidly. "Cece," a gentle voice sounded behind her. Lin Cece's body trembled. She slowly turned her head and saw Yimu Bai. Yimu Bai's expression was gentle, and he even smiled. "Why haven't you gone back yet? China Mo has something to do, so he left first." Lin Cece looked at him in a trance. She couldn't even hear what Yimu Bai said. She only knew that he was there, looking at her with warmth. Yimu Bai smiled. "Come here, I'll take you home." She didn't know how she got there, but she knew that her lips must be swollen and she was in a mess. She walked up to him and looked up. She looked like a child who had been bullied, and her voice was a little choked. "Oh Bai, call me Mubai." He sighed softly and took a tissue to wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes. She was crying, teardrops the size of beans rolling down her cheeks, but she didn't cry out loud. Instead, she seemed even more wronged. Yimu Bai kept wiping her tears until she stopped crying. "Good girl, don't cry. Wait for me in my car." Yimu Bai coaxed her like a child, put on his coat for her, and gave her the car key. Lin Cece looked at him without moving. "Isn't it normal for a man who pursues you to fight for you?" Yimu Bai was still smiling. He seemed to be smiling all the time. His temper was so good that it was speechless. Lin Cece suddenly understood what he meant. Her pupils shrank, and then a fair and tender arm stretched out from his coat and grabbed his wrist. "Don't." She shook her head lightly. "No." Her eyes were begging. Yimubai reached out and touched her little face. It was cold everywhere. It was the warmth of tears, and he couldn't help but feel sorry for her. He was a very considerate person. He thought that fighting with Guze here might make him happy, but Cece might not be happy. So he reached out and held her in his arms. "Okay, let's go back." Lin Cece didn't break free. She didn't want to break free at this time. Her legs were weak, and she needed support. As for that person, he didn't want her in the first place, and he treated her like this. There was no need to explain, and there was no need to avoid anything in front of him. Chapter 3181. Guze's heart felt cold, as if it had been contaminated by something. It was very cold, very cold. He couldn't touch it, and he couldn't wipe it away. It was more like Lin Cece's tears. At this moment, even if Yimubai fought with him, it would be better than this. His heart was so uncomfortable that it was about to burst, but he couldn't vent it. The light from above shone on his face, and the cloth was covered with a layer of darkness. Guze suddenly remembered that night, when Lin Cece stood at the door of his ward with a pale face and asked him, "Do you still want me?" But today, she left with someone else. It turned out that she was nothing more than this. He clenched his fingers into fists, loosened them, and clenched them again, as if he could vent the anger in his heart a few times. He didn't even know what he was angry about. Was he angry that she left? Or was he angry that she didn't take him seriously? Or was he angry that she said that she slept with someone else? That night, Guze was drunk in the bar. He drank as much as he could to numb his nerves. He wanted to forget everything. He wanted to forget the little fool in the villa in Sea City, and he wanted to forget Lin Cece. He drank as much as he could, trying to tell himself that they weren't the same person. He thought of the little fool, and he hated the little fool. None of this had anything to do with Lin Cece. Guze even changed his behavior and began to wander between socialites and starlets. Sometimes there was news of President Gu spending a lot of money to win a beauty smile. His self-discipline seemed to have come to an end. At the same time, he often made the headlines with Yimubai and Lin Cece scandal. There were often photos of them eating together, watching movies together, and even going out for fun. Those photos weren't explicit, just like ordinary boyfriend and girlfriend photos. But that made it even more obvious that it wasn't a scandal between them, but that it was real. Even at a charity dinner, Yimubai didn't avoid it and directly walked the red carpet with Lin Cece. The scene of them holding hands made all the headlines for a few days. Guze sat in his office and flipped through the newspaper. His eyes quietly fell on that photo. He was so absorbed in it that he didn't even hear what Su Qiaonan said a few times. "President Gu," Su Qiaonan said in a low voice. "Miss Irene called and said that you asked her out for dinner tonight. She wanted to remind you." Guze was startled and put down the newspaper in his hand. Of course, Su Qiaonan also saw it, and his eyes darkened. She knew very well in her heart why her boss had so many scandals recently. It was because Yimubai had appeared by Lin Cece's side. If it was like in the past, when Lin Cece only drank with the producer and danced with the producer, President Gu probably wouldn't care so much. However, there was an outstanding man who was not inferior to him in all aspects by his ex-wife's side. Any man would feel uncomfortable. Su Qiaonan understood that this was a common problem among men. Guze's finger lightly pressed down on the newspaper and said lightly, "Pick a gift for her for me." Su Qiaonan understood that Miss Irene was about to say goodbye. Actually, President Gu had only picked out some vases for fun recently. He did not intend to use them for real. But she just couldn't figure out why President Gu didn't use warmth when he was unhappy. Instead, he chose those women from afar. She didn't dare to ask, so she just bowed and left. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.